Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horne, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horne, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne. I am absolutely delighted to have in our virtual studio today a Bronx-raised, proud gay Puerto Rican-American and former Silicon Valley C-suite professional, Luis Baez. And he's dedicated to serving today online business owners, including consultants, coaches, B2B startups, and SaaS companies. He has over 14 years of experience in sales and marketing, bringing a breadth of knowledge and experience that spans across digital advertising, software, and sustainability, and many other accomplishments. In his career, he was named an official LinkedIn instructor, averaging 1,200, is that right? Learners a day. You can tell us all about that. And he has been on popular podcasts throughout the recent years. And we're so delighted to have him on Authentic Change with Mike Horne. So I'm going to let you tell more about yourself, Luis. I think you've got so many accomplishments and so many great things to talk about. And hola, Luis.
Hi, buenos dias, buenas tardes, wherever you are. Thank you so very much for lending me your ear. My name is Luis. My pronouns are he, him. And as Mike mentioned, I am a Bronx boy out here, first generation, first in my family to pursue an education, move into the corporate world, and having to navigate that without any background for it, without any uncles or aunties or anyone to turn to who's done it before me. And I have built a career that has, even as I listen to you, Mike, has just blown my mind. And I found my secret sauce in really my capacity for connecting with people, for gaining and earning their trust, and stepping into that teacher and consultative and coach sort of space. And so I now work full-time for a startup, overseeing their sales training and coaching programs. And then, as you mentioned, I also run my own business, consulting other online businesses and startups on how to develop their own sales teams and playbooks.
And sales is your total thing. I mean, it is your thing. And yet you describe yourself as an introvert. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I am someone who does not enjoy the spotlight. It exhausts me, but I do enjoy seeing other people thrive. And so I'm happy to be the hype man. I'm happy to be the person in the background, making sure that you've got everything that you need to shine. And I'm also someone that is aware of the fact that, I need moments to retreat and re-energize so that I can reapproach strategically. And that unorthodox sort of energy and way of thinking and moving has actually attributed to the success that I've had. As an individual contributor, I impacted over 600 million in sales. And so part of that was my capacity to get away from being pushy or sleazy or sharky or aggressive, and instead being that consultant on the floor or at the table that just listened.
And, you just mentioned a number, but after closing your first over $500 million in sales at Fortune 500 companies, I understand you still had trouble putting yourself out there confidently as an entrepreneur when you got started. Can you say some more about that, please, Luis?
Oh, gosh. I think that I reached a point where I was ready to step away from corporate and step into consulting and doing my own thing for a bit and just seeing how far down, I could go down that rabbit hole and develop new skills and challenge myself and stretch myself in a new way. And I thought that it would be a sort of, easier transition because I worked at these companies, selling really big deals, working long hours. And so I'm like, yeah, absolutely equipped to do this for myself. But I came up against, the challenges of a new role and having to learn a new job and having to learn new ways of functioning, operating, thinking, delegating, resourcing. It was a challenge unlike anything I could have anticipated. And so, yeah, I went through a bumpy start in entrepreneurship, but I'm grateful for it. I've earned all my badges.
So you had all of this corporate experience. Then you went into the trenches of building your own
Yeah.
Organization, your own business ecosystem. So you know about the importance of collaboration and strategy and money.
Yes.
And say some more about that, Luis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it wasn't until I stepped away from sales and corporate and started doing my own work, I didn't realize how good I had it in corporate, right? They handled my legal, they handled my marketing. I just had to focus on the sale. And then I'd walk away with my commissions and, I'd have a fun story to share. Um, and so it was a bulb or a light switch. Something went off in me. It was like, I started to recognize that there were things about my corporate experience that I needed to bring into my entrepreneurial experience. And there were certainly mindsets from my entrepreneurial experience to infuse in the ways that I move in my corporate experiences. And so I have now, being a revenue enablement practitioner and someone who coaches and teaches and trains, I'm very much focused on empowering and enabling sales reps, not only to develop the skills and capacity and competencies for selling and having productive conversations with customers, but really that mindset to develop so that they are always in the driver's seat of their book of business. And they have that sense of ownership and having a stake in the business that they're helping to build.
So it's true then, what we can read about you, that you're really out here for more than just a quick buck for yourself, and that you would give it away if you could. But talk a little more about that, Luis. Say some more about that part of yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. I don't think anyone's ever asked. I'm someone that grew up in poverty, right? I could never have imagined the life and the career that I live now, and I'm so grateful for it. And my cup is full, and so when it overflows, I have to think about, well, where else can I redirect? How else can I make an impact? And over the longer term, like everyone wants to stack money, everyone wants to be a millionaire. I know a lot of millionaires that are actually very unhappy. And they've accomplished the thing, they got the big payout day, and then they lost their sense of purpose. And so I want to, for myself, I've really focused on recalibrating my relationship with wealth and the capacity to influence and impact. And so, it's my dream someday. I'm someone that, grew up in public housing and went to public schooling and found refuge and safety and inspiration hanging out at the New York Public Library. And one of the things that I want to do is contribute and give back. I'd love to hand $1 million check to the branch that kept me safe all those days and nights and weekends after school, for all the books that were available to me, the computers that inspired me to move into this career path in tech, right? And just thinking about the community that I found there as a little gay boy in an environment where I wasn't totally welcomed. And so that's the work that I'm ultimately trying to do. And on the way there, I know I can't do it alone. And so my goal is to bring people up with me. We all win together.
Now, here are some things we know about you, and some of this I've read in our pre-show prep. You are, Luis Baez, the first in your family to go to college. You said that. First to own a business. And some other things is you own a PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and Oculus 2. You've rewatched the entire Ugly Betty series every year.
Yes.
You like the aisle seat when you travel. Bad Bunny is always on your playlist, and books and Kindles are your best friend. Well, that's a true story then. There's a testimony to that public library that you described. And if books and Kindles are your best friends, but let's get to a serious side of this. Is what exactly is entrepreneurship, and how do we cultivate it, and why don't people want to talk about sales, and how do you help people? How do you help professionals like coaches and others with their sales?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Entrepreneurship is what at the onset, I pursued it because I wanted to be in control of my time and my income. I wanted to have the flexibility to be more available to family without compromising on, lifestyle, health, and things like that. In the process of developing my entrepreneurial wings and learning and making several mistakes along the way, I recalibrated what my purpose was as an entrepreneur. And for me, it became this really urgent mission to create opportunity, to create jobs, to create wages, to create relationships between people, to bridge gaps. I started to realize that this focus or this lens on me, my money wasn't getting me anywhere. But the inspiration and the energy that I ended up getting and pursuing and building the business came from the relationships that I developed along the way. And the stories that I heard about people and how inspired they were to collaborate with me, how grateful they were to be connected to someone else, etc. And I started to take my job more responsibly as an entrepreneur, right? And I started to change my relationship with revenues because they were earned differently than my capacity as an account executive in corporate.
And so when you work with the coach, for example, you see that coach as having his, her, or their business. Mm-hmm. So how have business to business sales changed in the past few years?
I have been selling virtually since 2012. And the pandemic accelerated the ways that we sell in terms of using these virtual tools, leveraging personalized video, looking at, virtual showrooms and the way that we showcase product and services, right? It's completely shifted even the buyer's expectation, right? There are stats around how they actually want less engagement with the human earlier on in their discovery process. And they want, someone to guide them through, the implementation or the activation or the setup of something, right? That's typically when they do want someone to be a part of their buying journey. And so their desire and expectation has shifted. And so when I connect with entrepreneurs and people who are running their own businesses or building their own teams and building their own sales teams, we want to be thinking about, of course, designing customer experiences that meet them exactly where they expect to be met, but also think about the element or the opportunity of surprising and delighting. And based on that approach, we then design the sales playbook. What do the motions look like? What's the first engagement with the customer? What's the first conversation? What's the outcome of that conversation? How do we drive those outcomes, right? Let's move further down the journey. And when we're talking about negotiating terms or services, et cetera, how do we incentivize? How do we anchor? How do we close? And coach the close, right? So we look at that entire breadth of the motions and we look at the required skills, the required tools, and the best approach with the customer at each stage. And that thoughtful and methodical approach reduces the anxiety of selling, right? Because a lot of anxiety that people feel about putting themselves out there is attributed to not knowing what to say or what comes next or how to control the situation. But we have to stop and design intentionally what that process is.
It's wonderful. It's advice often I use in coaching, which is chunk the problem. Let's chunk it down. Let's break it into steps. Let's imagine success in these small steps. So you do the same thing. And with coaches, what's the, in terms of first steps, because that is where change occurs, is in these first steps that people take. What are the first things that a coach, an executive coach, needs to engage on with the prospect? What is that first conversation like? How would you describe that?
As far as in sales motion, when you're having that initial call,
Yes.
and having that conversation to better understand and do a needs analysis, right? I think the important thing is, especially when you're up against, someone who's considering your coaching services, you're up against someone that needs to demonstrate somehow a tangible outcome to justify the expense. You're talking to someone who isn't all the way bought in, and that's what you have to help to shift. And the way that you do that is by taking the spotlight and putting it squarely on them. And that's where you take them through that process of just asking them in the first place, like, what brought you to this conversation? Right? And what is it that you're expecting at the end of this conversation? And, based on whatever problem you may have or whatever solution we arrive at, how soon would you want to feel relief or see a solution in place? Right? I think that you have to help that person, sort of organize the chaos in their mind and articulate the problem, and then help them design the path to getting there. You have to literally, as a coach the sale.
Wonderful. So as I understand, these first steps might be, and this is what I do in my practice, is that, eventually after some talk about the weather or some other pleasantry or maybe a contact that we had in common, something is the question of what brought you here? What brought us to this conversation? What brought us to this meeting? And sometimes, prospects reply to me, well, I thought you knew about, a lot about me. You reached out to me. You got caught up in our sales campaign. Thank you. So glad. But I know something brought you here. So let's talk about that. And as we do that, what I love, because I don't think this is what we, being a good listener and asking an open-ended question like that can open up a rich vein of discussion. I don't think we often get to that second question, though, which is so important, is what would you like by the end of this conversation? I think that's just so critical, Luis. And if there were anything that our listeners would take away from this conversation, whether they're human resources leaders, leading teams or organizations, it's a great framework, too, to encouraging inclusion and encouraging a sense of being in on things. And then this first question, which I often pose is, what's the first step we're going to take here? You talk about it as how soon.
Yes.
And there's another wonderful example, I think, of you breaking it down. Now, you have to correct me if I got this right, but what brought you here? What would you like by the end of this conversation, and how soon? Are there other steps that I missed in your wonderful introductory process?
No, that's pretty much it. The thing that I like to acknowledge, particularly when I'm connecting with someone who's, for example, an executive or a business owner, you are stressed, you are busy, you're already suspicious about what I do and wondering if this is going to be the right investment. So I'm going to acknowledge that up front. Right? I'm actually not going to bother with pleasantries about the weather and where are you located and all those things that I should have Googled about you before I even got on the call, right? I'm instead going to say, hey, you've had an opportunity to research me. I'm sure you have a million questions for me. I'm prepared to answer all of them. I want to put the spotlight on you. I want to understand why you're here today, right? I think that that's so important because people are used to someone groveling about themselves or where they come from or what it is they do, where they offer. Let's just skip all of that. This is about you. This is your call. This is your time and your space, right? Because especially if I'm offering coaching services, I've got to demonstrate for you how I create space for you up front.
It's just as we entered our conversation, we didn't talk about any of that stuff. And we really focused right on the task at hand. Now, that might be different in some other things, but I really like where you help people in this regard. And that's what's so important, is the work that you're doing to help people by saying, hey, you've already researched me. You're busy. I want to put our entire focus of this conversation, of this discussion, of this dialogue on you, and shine a light on you and hear you. And let's just start by what brought you here. Yeah, wonderful.
I think that's really important. And the thing that you do thereafter is set an agenda, right? I think that what you're doing is applying a filter of qualification up front, right? You're gaining that trust, focusing the spotlight on them. That's a psychological process that they're going through. But what you're going through is really applying a filter of, does it make sense for us to stay on the phone for the next 20 minutes? Is this
Yeah,
person?
that's all the time you want. And
Yeah.
what I have a question is that, do you tell people that you've researched them? Like say,
Yeah.
I've looked at you on LinkedIn. I know enough about you. Let's talk about, what brought you here at this moment in time.
Absolutely. You acknowledge that you've done your due diligence, but you recognize that a LinkedIn profile could never tell me what the real problem is. So let me hear it in your voice.
Now let's get to the heart of the question on authentic change with Mike Horne, which is, how can we be authentic in our sales?
Get away from trying to be the know-it-all and the expert. I think that the part where I see, particularly when I'm coaching sales reps, where they trip up, where they lose face, where they start to sweat and start to, stutter, is when they try too hard to control the conversation and be the total subject matter expert. I think if it's enough to admit to a prospect or a customer when you're on the line with them that you don't fully know the answer. Do you mind if I ask one more question? Do you mind if I can get you the answer to that? But can you help me understand why this is important to you? Right? That capacity to not lose sight of the customer and to continue to go and pull at the thread and get to the core of what's really driving and incentivizing them to engage with you in the first place. I think that's where you will spare yourself from losing face. The other thing about authenticity is, it requires courage, right? I think it's akin to integrity, which requires that your thoughts and your actions are aligned. But authenticity requires the additional layer of courage and making sure that you are expending that energy and showing up as yourself. You will never, ever know who would appreciate you being your whole self in a conversation if you just don't shine.
Now, you have done so many things with this wonderful framework, whether it's been in your work at LinkedIn, Google, Uber, Tesla, or whether your authorship with LinkedIn Learning or Cornerstone. I assume that's like Cornerstone On Demand, the learning management system. Whether you've been a speaker at Stanford or Berkeley or other institutions, or your consulting work with different folks. All of this work leads to questions that people connect with you, one, to know if a sales coach is right. And I guess two, to invite you to speak or to show at another event. Can you talk about those two streams of your work and your consciousness now?
Yeah, thank you so much. I spent a lot of time working one-on-one with executives or working with teams, developing their sales playbooks and such. And then I started getting tapped to speak on leadership and how to cultivate, performance-based cultures that are also inclusive and safe and focus on belonging. And I have enjoyed taking the stage and being keynote speaker at sales and revenue enablement summits throughout the country. It's been amazing to expand on the work that I've been doing and to make a bigger impact, starting the conversation in a space where we might not otherwise consider, make considerations about these things. And even, has inspired other paths for me. I'm thinking about, books and things that I want to publish down the line. I've been tapped on to consider adjunct professorships and things like that. I mean, it's been beautiful. It's been amazing. The kind of support and validation I've gotten along the way as I've leaned into my courage and used my voice. And really what drives that work is a lot of the experiences that I've had as someone who is first generation, an out gay man in corporate, in settings where, I work with people that didn't always have the cultural intelligence to connect with someone that was different than them, right? We talk about, as a leader, emotional and intellectual quotients and intelligence and capacity. But when you're leading teams that are inclusive and you're stepping into global functions, there's a layer of cultural intelligence, which we can't quite measure the same way that we can measure IE or IQ or EQ, right? but it's an important consideration, and now I'm in a position to advocate for that, to advocate for people's self-awareness about how much cultural intelligence they have, and to remind them of their capacity to expand so that they can be better leaders that are more inclusive and create safer spaces for productivity.
Well, you and I both know the benefits of having a sales coach. And I know there are 5 benefits that we share. One is that with a sales coach, you can really set your sights on consistent growth, consistent month-over-month growth. Now, I've experienced that. And once you have a system in place, you need execution on that. And it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work with social media and other email campaigns, but it's the only way to get it's numbers. It's consistent month-to-month growth. But as you do it, work with your clients, it also gives me a more flexible schedule so that we have other people working on this so that I have more space to do my content writing, content development, my weekly blog, which you can find on the website mike-horne.com. But most of our listeners know that, but I want to let new listeners know that as well. Certainly find greater work-life balance, and greater work-life blend is what I call it. I don't think about it so much as balance because I think sometimes work takes over, sometimes family takes over, sometimes X or Y takes over. So we're always looking to create an effective blend that works for us so that we have time for the important things, a healthier lifestyle, and certainly more time for friends and family. And I know these are objectives that you share with me on the benefits of having a sales coach, Luis. And I know people can find out so much more about you at luisbaez.com, which everyone will find in the great show notes to Authentic Change with Mike Horne. And if you were, here we are coming up towards the end of the year, and we're thinking about 2023 and fourth quarter sales pitches, final, passes, leaps, what advice would you give to our listeners who are interested in that? And we'll begin to close the show right after that. What advice would you have or suggestions for people who are listening to this who still have goals to accomplish this year?
Yeah, I want to I have total empathy for what you're going through. I've been there. I've been down to the wire, trying to perform my best, do my best, deliver for my teams, take care of my people, take care of my customers, get that check, have a good holiday season, right? Like I understand exactly where you are, my friend. And I promise you that it is possible to succeed and to thrive. But the requirement is not the silver bullet talk track or email cadence or the right subject line for that LinkedIn message or anything. That's not it. The secret to your success is really about how well you take care of yourself, because the work that you do requires optimal quality of mind and body.
That's wonderful advice, Luis. As many people are moving into a year end and thinking about what that means in terms of sales, and also maybe continuing to do some forecasting around next year. So as I stated earlier, people can find out a lot more about you and be in touch with you at luisbaez.com, LUISBAEZ, for those of you who don't read the show notes, but just listen. You can visit him there. And it's been a delight and a pleasure for me to interview Luis today, and for him to share his knowledge. I found it particularly informative and helpful and meaningful and relevant for all of the work that we do. So once again, Luis, thank you. And until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership, and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horne.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horne.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.